going to talk today about monotone board heuristics and cash games, or how to study them. We're going to go over a few heuristics, a few specifics, and how to really retain usable data that you can just easily apply in game. We're going to have a universal framework. And what I want to talk about also is why monotone boards are more important than you give them credit to be, or most people give them credit to be. Flop heuristics, how to use custom aggregate reports for SRPs, 3-bet, and 4-bet pots, how to apply what you've learned from the flop reports afterwards, right? So you're going to make those reports and gather that data. If not, you can just use the normal reports, but custom aggregated reports with dynamic sizings are a lot more useful. Turn reports, we're going to use turn reports from the normal sims and how to use them properly, because they actually evidentiate some really, really cool things that we're going to get into. This is the very fun part of the coaching. How to go about sizing, how to look at equities, and how to think laterally about how different turns affect the whole strategy, the whole outcome, how ranges look like, and what each bet size does, right? So how to look at our opponent and how to figure out what each bet size kind of does to his range and how he has to react. And otherwise, if he doesn't react like that, then he's going to lose an EV, right? So hand categories, we're going to look at different hand categories, and we're going to look also at EV denial and a universal thinking framework for studying monotone boards. This is what this coaching really strives to offer, and prediction by comparison. So we look at this board, we look at ace 8-7 and ace 8 deuce, and how does it affect and some stuff in our range. And we look at early position SRP versus big blind, for example. How is ace 8-7 different from ace king 5 or something like that, right? So we're going to look into that. And by prediction, you're going to be able, hopefully after the end of this coaching, to understand how to apply strategies to monotone boards, right? So let's talk a little bit about the importance. This slide might feel slightly familiar if you watched my previous coaching, because it has the same idea based in it. So monotone boards, about 5.2% of total boards. Even 5 hours spent into monotone boards is more than 90% or 95% of your opponents have put into them, right? So if you are the 5% that has put in effort into these boards, then you will have extra win rate, extra edge compared to your opponents, specifically in this spot. And I think this is how most EV and most edge is generated at higher stakes, at mid stakes plus, Dolman 200 plus, is looking into spots where your opponents, don't really know how to go about them, they haven't studied that much, because everybody knows that on ace king X in SRP, you're supposed to just go wild, right? Overbet flop, just put in your stack, rainbow turns, brick turns, overbet, draw completing turns, don't overbet, bet smaller, because you need to include, other portions of your opponent's range. In these spots and in this coaching, you will discover something that will kind of hopefully change how you think about poker and how you think about these spots, and change how you understand edge. And I really, really hope that. So it's easy to stop leaking in the spot. Also, it's a spot that is slightly easier to comprehend. And I think this hour will be very, very good, because hand classes dictate most of the action, right? So for example, SRP, B25, so where you have a small bet on the flop, and then you're supposed to be defending. So you're kind of denying EV from your opponent's gut shots and your opponent's bottom pairs that turn into either folds or raises, and very rarely calls. After you put in 5 hours, 10 hours, 15 hours into this subject, I would really suggest, or like 20 hours. That's a lot. For monotone boards, that's a lot. I'd really suggest moving to something else, moving to another subject until you've really, really expanded over everything. And then maybe you come back and you go into specifics in monotone boards, because after 20 hours invested into this subject, you'll just mostly be very, very okay compared to your opponents. You'll just be crushing them in this spot. As you can see, the law of diminishing returns affects this. So if you go over like 30 hours, you'll have like a lot of edge. And this might seem linear, but if you look at the hours invested graph, after 30, it starts to be 10 extra, 10 extra, 20 extra, 100 extra. Yes, if you put in 100 hours into monotone boards, right, then you're going to be the absolute master of monotone boards. but your edge will not be very significant compared to when you put in 20 hours into monotone boards compared to your opponents. Even if it's a cash game session, should many of the concepts presented on monotone boards also apply to MTTs, even if you have less than 100 big blinds? There are some differences. Bozer Bub, there are some differences. Some of the concepts will apply, some of the concepts will apply differently. So I'm not exactly sure. I'm not a master of monotone boards in MTTs, but I'm pretty sure that at 100 big blinds, you will find some of the spots. And if you look in some of the same turn reports, for example, we're going to look into turn reports, it's going to be mostly the same sizes and ideas. The big difference being that big blind defends a lot wider in MTTs because of the ante, and you kind of probably still have a little bit smaller sizes on the flop, right? So I think it's going to be fine. Yeah, earlier stages for sure, you might have even smaller sizes on the flop, but mostly you're kind of denying from the range, like kind of the same portion. So we're going to see that. Flop heuristics. We're going to use custom aggregated reports to determine sizings. We're going to get the bet sizes from each spot and make an average, right? So as you can see, at the top, you have UTG versus button filtered by high card. We're going to jump into GTO Wizard in a second and look at it. Also, as you can see, total monotone boards are 5.2%. So 1 in 20 boards, you're going to have a massive edge over your opponents, hopefully, And you try to remember the general ideas, the frequency, and you go in depth with analysis, right? So once you go in depth with analysis, then you try to figure out, okay, what does this bet sizing do to my opponent? Right? Or why are we using this bet size? The 15-minute rule, by the way, and I really want you guys to not look at a spot more than 15 minutes, like at a turn or something like that. Because if you can't figure it out in 15 minutes, my rule is to save the spot by pressing M, by the way, in GTO Wizard, using the save button, leaving a note there, and coming back to it later. I learned this from Alex Banzia, who is international chess master, is my chess coach, actually, and IRL friend. And he told me, if you look at a puzzle for 15 minutes and you still can't figure it out, you're not going to do it that day. Move on. You'll figure out another day. And also the brain has like some background processes that are still working on that spot while you're sleeping, by the way, or while you're doing other stuff. So maybe at some point you'll figure it out. Maybe at some point you'll get back to it and still invest a little bit of time. So that's mostly the process that we're going to do with flop heuristics. How do we gather stats for a spot? We have 3 groups. We have ace high, Broadway, and low, right? So ace high, ace XX, Broadway, BXX. That's how I do the notation. It's just a notation. And low is LXX. So at the bottom right, if I can direct your attention, the spot is UTG versus button SRP. And sorry, this is a 3-bet pot, button versus UTG. For some reason, this is another image. In general, right? So we look at the general stat, and it's going to be 30% check, B25, 62%, B50, 7%. On an ace high, right? So we filter out the ace high. We're going to do check 32%, bet 25, 42%, and B50, right? This is the only spot where B50 is actually getting used on the ace high. 26%. I just round this up. You don't have to be extremely precise. You don't need the decimal. Then you kind of take these, and I'm going to try to demonstrate it a little bit in GTO Wizard. So how do we go about this spot? So I go to custom reports where I did it. Let's try, if this is UTG versus big blind, we're going to go to the custom report. Then we're going to press check here because this is the big blind, and we're going to look at UTG. From the filter that is right here, this is the filter screen. Then you have monotone. You have to click on monotone, and you immediately get all the monotone boards. Now, okay, it was 3-bet, but okay, we're going to demonstrate on this one. You see 5.2% of boards. This is the stat. So this is the line that you want to look at. Not this one. This one is going to be general stats for the spot for all of the 1,755 boards. This is the stat that you want to look at. When you want to get heuristics for ace high, you look at this line. And when you want to get heuristics for Broadway, you have to go to the filter and select the highest card to be king, queen, jack, or 10. So this is very important. You don't take each and then you average it out, okay? You can just select these and you will see right here. So again, don't do this one. You might make a mistake by doing this one. I already made it. That's absolutely fine. 3%, right? And then this is the average. And this is what you take home. You don't take home king, queen, jack, and 10. You just take home the average, and that's it. Okay, that's all you got to do. And then when you want to go the low XX, right, LXX, then you go highest card, you press any, and then you go and select all the lowest ones, right? And now you have the next average. So you do the next average, okay? And you use this one. And this is the strategy that you use for all the low boards. You see that most of them are actually very similar. So they don't really change that much, okay? When you go eight high boards and lower, that's a weird way of saying, but 8 high boards and lower, you'll see that there is some B50. But this B50 will be reflected also in the average, right? So it's not a tragedy if you take a 9 high board and actually, let's say that 8-7 deuce is a B50 board. If you take 9-8 deuce and you think, I'm going to use B50 on this one because that's how I think about this spot. That's how the 8 high. That's never a tragedy. That's going to be absolutely fine. So the EV difference is super minimal based on that. So this is how you extract data on the flop. And I think this is a great way to like figure out frequencies in different spots, right? So you just got to go filters, monotone, and then sort it by high card. Not an issue. Cool. I have a spot prepared this for later. Anyways, right? So this is how you're supposed to be gathering data. Next, when you're gathering data properly, and this is kind of how I use it. I started using Discord and I created a private server. I have different channels for each subject. And I just use that. I just use that as to put screenshots, to leave a little bit of information here, and then I average these spots out. So you don't need to go into absolutely every spot. You don't need custom reports for every spot. That'd be like really, really costly. But what you could do is, for example, you have SRP, right? And you have UTG versus big blind, you have button versus big blind. And the other two are kind of in between, right? Or you're thinking about figuring out monotone boards. And remember that once you make a custom report, you're not making it only for monotone boards. You're making it for all the flops. So you use these reports for everything, not only for mono, but you use them specifically. So 3-bet in position, you choose the tightest spot. What is the tightest spot? Middle position versus early position. That's the tightest spot. Okay. What is the loosest spot in this configuration of imposition? Blind versus blind is a little bit different. That's farther away, right? BVB should be generally treated separately. Button versus cutoff is the loosest spot. What is the median spot? Well, it's cutoff versus MP. So you take these three and you average out the frequencies, right? So you get the frequencies for each on general, ace high, Broadway, and then low XX, right? 9 and lower. And then you average out each, and then you figure out, okay, this is how the general strategy of 3-bet in position is going to look like, and you apply that. If the board, then you apply some nuances, right? If the board is slightly better for you, then you bet more frequently or with a bigger size, or the size kind of depends on like high card and like how the spot works. But if it's better for you, you bet more frequently. If it is, you can estimate that it's worse for you, you bet less frequently. That's kind of how it works. If you don't know, if you have no idea, just stick to base frequency and I promise you'll be absolutely fine. All right, so you simplify the strategy, one size per board type, compare the EVs, and write down the results in sheets. So for example, also in this low XX configuration, if you have B25, most boards, and B50 is 2%, that B50 won't bring you anything. The idea is to simplify, not to complicate your life. That B50 on 2% of low boards, just shut it out. You know, the ace high, B59%, this might be an idea. Look on ace king X, look where this B50, because there might be an idea behind it, and you might figure out something. That's good. That's really, really good, right? If you figure out something, then you figure out something extra compared to your opponents, which is super nice, right? So after this, try to understand what each size does and why it works. So we're going to see a very cool spot in a 4-bet pot with like B10. So we're going to get there. And how to execute the low bet size. You're going to find out that you need to execute a lot of bet sizes at frequency. How do you execute frequency? First of all, you need to know the frequency. Okay, so B10, B25, B33 on boards where you can't really range. Don't range everything, please. Okay. No, if you have averages for frequencies, then that's going to be really, really good because you'll know kind of where you're at, right? If the frequency is over 80%, the size is small, you can kind of bet range. without too much EV loss. If the frequency is under 20%, you can kind of check range, okay? Or bet only the most important hands, and that's also really, really good. By knowing the general frequency, like the super median average frequency that you've gotten from the previous step, okay? And you adapt it to the board and also to your hand. So is Ace King 7 better for UTG than Ace 8-7, right? In SRP versus Big Blind. You kind of have that thought process, then you figure out, okay, if the frequency is 50%, Ace King 7 is worse because I have less flushes. So I'm probably supposed to go down on frequency. So I'm going to bet something like 30%. Ace 8-7, maybe it's kind of in the median. Maybe Ace 8 deuce would have been better. 8-7 Big Blind has some 2-pair, you know. Maybe I keep it on frequency, right? 80% of hands will be around the vicinity of the frequency. So if you scroll down and you look at the strategical aspects, so like the strategy tab, 80% of hands will be very close to that frequency. So if your frequency is 50%, then a hand like, I don't know, like top pair would probably be around that. You know, a hand like a set would be more. A hand like a flush would probably be more, depending on the flush. You know, a hand like absolute trash might be around that, might be more or slightly less. A medium hand like ace deuce on Ace 8-7 might be in the low ones. You know, might be like a bit more trappy. It might be not a lot of point in betting that. 80% of hands will be in about 20% of vicinity. Between, if your base frequency is 50, will be between 30 and 70%, around that. Don't deviate. So you don't really have, if your frequency is 50, you don't have pure anything almost, right? So if you have like nut flush, you might still want to go pure against some opponents, but most of the time, if you want to be balanced, don't do like 80%, you know? So don't really deviate a lot from this. If your hand is strong or better, or a better bluff, bet more frequently. If not, you know, less frequently. That's about it. Cool. So preferred bet size on monotone board. What is the bet size? This is 3-bet pot. Big Blind has 3-bet versus UTG. You get an Ace King 5 flop. Okay. What is the size that you want to fire here? It's an Ace King board, right? So to me, I'm just going to explain how this looks to me. B10 denies pocket sevens, no heart, denies a lot from that. But our range is kind of polar, but also our Big Blind 3-betting range, remember guys, our Big Blind 3-betting range is polar, but also contains a lot of ace high and king high. So we actually smashed this board in a way, right? B25 would put a lot of kings into jail, not really targeting something like king, queen of spades. I would look at B25. I'm looking at king, queen of spades. I'm not really looking at pair plus heart. That can easily call. B50. Ooh, I like the B50. I like the board blocks most of the flushes. That's a really good observation. Big size because board blocks most flushes. Also really good observation. So the correct answer was actually B75. We just go wild. We actually just go wild because, and it was correct. It was actually correct because big size, because board blocks most flushes. I actually had a spot yesterday where it was a 3-bet pot 3-way as a parallel, and I had Jack 10 suited. I was the opener. It was a 3-better out of position, a cold caller in the big blind. I called. Flop came down, ace, king, queen, 3 diamonds. At that point, I know that nobody has a flush. Like, it's so rare that somebody has a flush. I happily stack off, and the guy stacks off with ace, queen, which is not the worst play, by the way. So we held, in case anybody's wondering. Right. So my question is, how much does B25 lose here compared to B75? Right? You don't actually have to answer this in chat because this just puts just a little bit in perspective. The fact that if you just range B25 absolutely every board, you will basically run into a wall. You will lose 23 big blind per 100, for example, in this particular spot. So if we're looking at ace king 5 in this particular spot, right? So this, I've already made this tree. It's a big blind 3-bet versus UTG. And we're looking at the ranges, right? This is, let's look at B75. I was looking at different sizes, so I saved it as B125. But if you look at the EV here, the EV of big blind with B75 is 15.39. If we just change this to B25, it will drop down really, really significantly to 15.16. I hope my math is right, but we're losing 23 blinds per 100. If we do B10, just in case somebody said B10 in chat, which I actually like as a size, but it's not the correct one here. We lose about, I don't know, what is that, 50 blinds per 100? Anyways, I don't dislike it versus most opponents, human opponents, but in a solver land. Pot is also fine, by the way. So here pot is also in very, very acceptable sizing. It just, compared to B75, it just loses one big line per 100, which in a 3-bet pot is really not a lot. If you go too big, if you just overbet, then it just starts to not like what you're doing. You start to go on the other side of the loss rate. So flushes get denied. This monotone board doesn't really exist, right? So that's why I thought it was really interesting that I tried this. So this is where the fun part actually starts. We're going to use some turn reports to get a general idea on sizes. We're going to look at some turns. We're going to see what each size accomplishes on the flop and turn. We're going to select one board, by the way, for each flop type. So Ace XX, Broadway XX, Low XX. The boards that I wanted to select because they cover not only the flop tree, but also the strength. So the kind of how good they are for you in different order. So Ace 8-5 is actually the worst. King 10-6 better. 7-6 deuce way better. So we're going to see this. These are the boards that I selected for each of the 3 flop types. So I'm going to jump you into GTO Wizard. We're going to look at a spot. So first spot that we're going to look at is SRP. We're looking at the 500 ranges, general, GTO, right? And we're going to look at UTG open and big blind call. Oh, 200 blinds. There we go. Okay. Yeah. Cash 100. Yeah. So UTG open, big blind call. We're going to look at the first board, Ace 8-5. And we're going to look at what we're trying to do here. What we're trying to do is mostly bet small. And the reason why we're betting small is because we're trying to deny from our opponents. So you can always go into the summary tab and filter by strategy. It's like sorted by strategy. And the hands that mix are the hands that you're trying to deny. So if you look at the board Ace 8-5, there's also another really cool way to do this is you look in the filters tab and you filter for equity 0 to 25. And you can also go afterwards to 2 to 50. So 0 to 25, you will see that we're kind of denying gut shots here. Okay. The lower ones want to raise, and the higher ones are actually folding. Something like 9-7, actually 9-6 are immediately folding. 7-4, 6-4, 4-3, 4 deuce are actually raising. Cool. These have hearts excluded, by the way, because we just filtered for 0 to 25. Next, 25 to 50. What are we affecting with our B33 or B25? Depends on preference. It's not going to change the situation a lot. Bottom pair is getting used as a set blocker, plus backdoor straight draw, right? So 5-4, 5-3, 5 deuce, some of these, and then all the other bottom pairs are just outright folding. Middle pair is frequency defending, right? Pocket tens. And that's why we keep the size small here. We do have nut advantage. We have a lot of flushes, right? We have the king high flushes. Yes, a lot of our suited. Also, why is this board kind of like, why are we checking 50% on this board? This board is not really great for us, okay? Because all of this, like early position, has a suited contingency of mostly suited aces. If it's an ace high board, that's really not that great for you, right? So you only have, what's left is this side. Whereas if you look at big blinds, he has all of this to counter you with, right? But we still have some nut advantage. We still have some reason to bet, right? So you bet small because we want to, first of all, put in jeopardy, offer a lot of difficulty to hands like tens, no heart. So pocket pair, no heart. Second pair defends at a frequency. Obviously, top pair is doing perfectly okay. And bottom pair with backdoor straight draw is getting used as a set blocker. And same for like second pair backdoor straight draw is always getting used as a set blocker, right? And unblocks some folds. So after we bet, we also have to check out something. What are we getting raised by? That's not a set blocker, right? So how are his flushes playing? Okay. So first of all, we see that a lot of his flushes are frequency raising. I have a really, really good question for chat, by the way. Why are these flushes raising way more? So even something like Jack 4 hearts, right, is raising way more than something that like King Jack of hearts. If you have a queen or like a king with a deuce, you actually don't really, the deuce doesn't really block any of UTG's flushes because we don't even, as UTG, we don't even have ace deuce of hearts because the ace is already down there, and we don't have king deuce of hearts. So these flushes are the best to raise. I would probably raise these pure. As a very simplified strategy, just raise these pure and not raise these at all. And that's not going to really result in any significant EV loss against a human. Okay, so remember this heuristic because this is great. Cool. When big blind raise 8x, does it make overpairs fold, or what's the goal to raise mid pairs? The goal to raise mid pairs is to have bluffs on heart runouts. When you're raising a flop, and when you have bluffs, you need, for example, we're going to use the exclude feature. We're going to exclude hearts from suited. And you see that everything else that raises is a pair or a straight draw, right? You have set blockers, you have call blockers, right? You have like some of these gut shots that are absolute not low, but the pairs, they go hard. And you have set blockers, plus they have some equity, right? They have some equity. And they're not great to call also. You will never call a turn bet on any turn. If we exclude, now let's look at single hearts. We see that we've got a lot of king, queen, king, jack, king 10, queen 10, jack 10, queen, jack that are raising with a heart, right? So the ones with the jack of hearts, the queen of hearts, and the king, queen, for example, with the king and the queen of hearts are all frequency raising. This is going to be very, very important for the turn. So that's how our opponent's raising range is composed. Then you have some two pair and cut shots, flushes. That's about it. Cool. When he calls though, all right, so raising to have pot. When he calls though, and we're going to look at turn reports, and this is where the magic happens. There's going to be a very cool heuristic that a lot of people don't actually apply. There's not that much leading. There's some sort of leading on like most boards, but there's not really a lot of leading. These boards, these turns are actually filtered by suit. So at the top, you can see the spade, then the hearts, right? 2, 3, 4, 5, then the diamonds, and then the clubs. Remember that we have hearts on our board. And if you can see the sizes here, you can see that dark red is overbetting, right? The other ones, the lighter ones, are betting smaller, but dark red is overbetting. Normally, you'd say on a flush draw board, if you remember turn heuristics, when a flush completes, you're not really going very, very big. And a lot of people actually think that this sort of board, this sort of heuristic actually happens in monotone boards where it's actually the exact reverse. Why are we going so big on 4-card flush turns? Well, first of all, we got to look at the equity. Let's have a peek at the equity. Maybe the equity can tell us something, you know? It doesn't look too good, right? It looks, these are bad turn for us. These are the worst turn for us. 42, 42, 44, 46. So the higher the card on like the other ones, the better the equity. But on these flush ones, our equity is actually super tanking. Our equity is 42. What's going on? So then you take one turn. You take like a 10 of hearts, right? And then you look at the ranges. Before anybody does anything, before any bleeding, you click on the ranges. And on this 10 of hearts, or whatever heart, it doesn't matter. You guys can choose, okay? On this 10 of hearts, yes, our equity is 43. It's super tanky. But look at our not advantage. So number one clue, not advantage. Look at all this. This is the same. You'll see that this is the same, but this chart is not actually accurate because this is the king of hearts region. So this right here is the king of hearts region, but it's equal, but it's not, because when we have the king of hearts, our opponent cannot have the king of hearts. It's not like rainbow boards where one has top set, one has mid set. No. This is actually our full advantage right here. So our advantage is 19% of nuts. And he also has a lot of hands that he can pay us off with. He has a lot of hands in the higher equity brackets, okay? So that's why we actually fist pump overbet in the spot, okay? So if you look at it, we're just going insano mode, 175. The other reason why we're going absolutely hog wild here is because on the flop, if you remember, we talked about his raising range on the flop. It contained these king of hearts, queen of hearts, jack of hearts. And this is the heuristic, by the way, for all and most boards, that on monotone, you're actually going for a way bigger size. when a fourth card of that suit comes. So if you would have gone for B75, you're overbetting. If you would have gone, maybe it's a 3-bet pot, and you would have gone for like B50, you're going for pot or B75 or even overbet, right? So that's why on these turns, you are going wombo combo. You're going absolutely hog wild with the king of hearts. And look at this B175 with king queen with the queen of hearts, because he's raising a very large contingency of queen of hearts on the flop, right? So that means that we have a huge equity advantage, right? So I think that's an awesome heuristic. Most people think that these turns are B50, B75, right? I've seen in these notes, big blind supposed to fold queen high flushes at some weight, possibly on the river, possibly versus B75, but mostly queens is mixing. Nobody's folding like a king of hearts, but yeah, this is how it's gonna be. But the thing is, most humans are gonna defend a queen, but look at all this stuff that has to call at frequency. All this jack high flush, because you also block other flushes, right? Because queen 7 is going to be way better than pocket queens, because you have the 7 that blocks king 7 of hearts, right? And king queen of hearts. So all these flushes are blockers. So you got to defend them. And it's so hard to do that. It's so hard to do that. Okay. And pocket 9s at frequency. And every pair, almost every pair, is defending at frequency, which is, I don't know, man. It looks apocalyptic. And I have another spot for you guys that is going to look wild. How does river play out? Well, we're getting there. We're getting there. If we only jam nuts, our bluffs can't have blockers, so it's not a true polar spot. Does that mean we size down instead? That's nice for values. There are also good heuristics for bluffs from our side. The heuristics for bluffs on our side is, I guess, mostly call blockers. You have, I've studied a little bit in the spot, and the spot, it's like the recurring theme is you want to bet king high, as weird as it sounds. So what I've seen here is, let's do, so an easy way to look at bluffs is literally to exclude hearts, for example, and you're betting a lot of king highs. So the board is ace 8, 5, 10, and you're betting king 7 of the other suits, king 9, king jack. King jack is actually pretty cool as a straight draw that would never help. But you're kind of blocking a lot of hands, if you think about it. You're blocking king queen with the queen of hearts. You're blocking with the king of spades. You're blocking king jack with the jack of hearts. You're blocking king 10 with the 10 of hearts. You are blocking pocket queens with the queen of hearts and the queen. So if you think about it, king blocks a lot of hands that can call, right? And queen blocks king queen with the king of hearts, right? So you want to bet call blockers. And that's kind of how I understood this spot. If we exclude one heart combos, then it's kind of going the same route, okay? And the fun one is pocket aces, but this is not really a bluff, but still going B175. If I get shoved on, life is really sad, right? So 8s and 5s, and so also like these really bottomish pairs without a heart. That's about it. How does the river play out? If we only jam nuts, our bluffs can't have blockers, so it's not a true polar spot. Does that mean we size down instead? We can look at it. So B75, I think very obviously, versus this size, big blind will actually never ever raise. And we can look at a super break river. No leading, super polar. On the river, you're actually quite right. We don't jam. We do B150. But versus, so I would play this spot against the human, just as a slight intervention. I would play the spot against the human with a smaller bet size on the turn, like B125. I'd still overbet. And there's two types. So honestly, along my cash game career, I realized that there's two types of humans. There's types of humans that will call in on this river and actually find frequency calls. And there's types of guys that will never call in all in on this river unless they have basically the nuts. Versus the first type that will call all in on this river, I will be 150 with bluffs and all in with value. And versus the second type that will never call in all in on this river, except for like super nuts, I will overbet with bluffs, and I will be 75 or find a size that they would call for with value, basically, if that makes sense. So it's always also about adjusting. This is just a little bit of exploitation in there, but you always want to bet something that your opponent will call, and you always want to bluff a size that they will not. And there's people who have really a lot of people who have blind spots, especially on these boards. Does it make sense to do B175 with aces? Absolutely. That's also fair. And do you mean on the turn or on the river? Because on the river is like B150. Aces on the turn is so it's a value bluff. If you understand B175, he folds hearts, but still has to call worse sets. Does that make sense? Right? You're not gonna get shoved versus that size. Your opponent is never raising. So that's number one. Number two, it's a great value bluff because on paired boards you can shove value. By the way, if you only bet king of hearts and then it's a paired board, oops. You know, fives call, eights call, so worse calls, right? And then better folds, right? So you have hands like pocket queens with hearts that fold. So aces is actually a value bluff on the turn. You will see that we stop at eights. Eight starts to mix. We actually stop at fives. Five starts to mix. But aces is almost always full, right? It's a balance thing. It's a clairvoyant thing, but also it's not the worst thing that you can do in the world. And you'll not really get shipped on very, very often on the turn because B175 sounds tremendous, but it's only 13 blinds. Okay. And then on the river brick, then you don't really shove. It's very close. You actually do B150. So I would generally just opt for the either for all in or B75 against human opponents. And also I agree that it would be really interesting to do locks versus recreationals, but it's definitely for homework or something that I will do in a future video or something like that. So we got a spot saved here. And this is the same board, same spot, same board. UTG. So SRP, let's remember SRP, UTG versus big blind. Ace A5, same board. On the turn 10 though. So this is going to be a very clear B75. There's no reason to overbet now. We do B75, B50, something like that, right? We still want to keep in a lot of big blinds, top pairs. So this B50, sorry, this B75 kind of fries his top pairs, but they still have to be kept in. Remember that we have a range that is invulnerable, which is flushes. And then on the river deuce, when he checks. So the river again comes a card that your opponent had plenty of time. And remember that on the flop, he was raising a lot of his king of hearts X, queen of hearts X. Now on the river, it again favors us, right? This deuce of hearts. So we have a 3x pot size. We want to catch up to the value that we lost by not really betting big on the turn. And our opponent's range is mostly just bluff catchers. That's it. So versus this, it's mostly bluff catchers. One fun, really, really fun thing that I wanted to show you guys was that if you 3x pot in this spot, your opponent has absolutely no bluff raises. So this is not extremely useful, but very fun, that your opponent will never bluff raise. It's you put in 56 blinds and your opponent has a 90 blind raise all in on the river, and he will do so absolutely and exclusively only with the straight flush that's on the board, which is the 4-3 that's right here. And I will change to actually full height so that you guys can see. And there are no bluffs. He's raising only with king of hearts. And yeah, just everything is king of hearts. Absolutely everything is king of hearts. There's zero bluffing here, as you can see. So I thought that was funny and I thought I'd share that. It doesn't really have a lot of usefulness. Right, so if we look on a board now, that is 7-6 deuce, right? So we're going to look at the low one. Still UTG SRP versus big blind. The fun part is that on the flop, and why are we betting? And we're betting very, very often. We're doing some B50. We're doing some... Now we have all the flushes. Now all this contingency turns into a very significant portion of our range that is nutted, okay? Look at big blind. So like suited hands, although they seem like a lot, are actually a way lower part of his range than suited is of ours, because we don't really have a lot of offsuit stuff. So we're going to be 33. Big blind is going to play kind of sort of the same. But let's look at turn reports. So this is a really interesting spot. If you look at turn reports and the sizes for this spot, you will see the equity on low cards doesn't really favor us too much. You also see the sizes after it gets checked by the big blind. The sizes kind of respect the dynamic, right? There's overbetting on a hard turn size, and then all the other boards just use lower sizes. But if we look at the equity that we have on higher cards, right? We have more equity, so we can actually bet lower. And this is a really cool aspect of it. So you see on these lower cards, you actually have to polarize more because you don't have that much equity. On these hearts, your equity is actually shot the most, but you also have like the biggest nut advantage, so you bet really big. But on these really, really large cards that favor us, we have to bet smaller. and we can bet smaller. And I'll explain to you why this is a huge advantage. If you look at also big blind's range when he's calling and exclude hearts, this is one very, very important thing. Why on broadways we have so much equity is that big blind, after you bet B33 or B25, he has to fold absolutely every overcard known to existence, except for ace queen, and this is a gut shot. So if we look at hearts, he, like no heart hands, he has to fold absolutely everything, which I find hilarious because most humans actually don't fold ace jack in the spot, for example. Right, so then on broadways, we're going to have a massive advantage because we retain our range, because on this board, we're betting mostly range. Let's go back to normalized. So at this point on the turn, we can bet wide and we can bet small. And why is this a really, really big advantage? This is an infinite advantage because big blind is forced to raise. So let me clear. Big blind is forced to fast play. Otherwise, if he just calls this and he has the nut flush or the second nut flush or whatever flush, he's going to play a 10 blind pot or like a 12.5 blind pot. Sorry, 12.5 blind pot with nut flush. He has to raise. He's forced to raise. Look, he's raising like half his flushes. He has to do this. He's raising sets. And then when he calls on a brick river, what do you think happens? Like, what do you think happens? 3 river, super brick, right? Completes just the 4-5 string. Look at this. This is beautiful. Because he's so capped, because we bet small on the turn. He is infinitely capped, and we can shove. This is how somebody in chat also put it, a true polar spot, because we're just styling on him, right? Look at the amount of hands that he has in like a 25 to 50% equity bracket. We got advantage in nuts, and look at this. So if we shove, right, 7.5x pot, the amount of hands that he has to defend, he's folding at 8.6. He has to call. Like he can't fold range. Some people will fold range in spot, except for like nut flushes. But people will also slow play more on the turn. But he has to call all the flushes. Almost all the flushes. Like 90% of flushes and some top pair blocker hands. Like everything that is 90%, 70%, even 50% equity has to call here, right? This is wild. This is super, super wild. This is a spot where you're going to get a massive amount of overfolds. I don't think there's a lot of humans. Let's go to full height. There's not a lot of humans that will call like blindly 9-5 here, right? Or 9-8 suited, or even like a queen high flush. If put yourself in this spot, right? Always when you're trying to think about exploits and trying to node lock and trying to do a lot of things, put yourself into the spot. Would you call? Would you call king 9 with the king of hearts blocker, right? So remember that on these higher cards, you can just bet smaller and forced, because you're backed up by your equity, and they're actually forced to raise with a lot of their strong hands, really. And then they are capped because they don't want to play a 12 blind pot, because he can just check back top here. Just check back king 10. A pot versus he loses so much when you check back like aces. That's kind of how the spot works. But let's recap, right? It's very, very important also to recap a little bit of what we learned. And also I have a bit of an explanation about flop passivity. Why are we so passive on flops? Why do we use small sizes, right? So on monotone board strategy, it's a big idea. The biggest idea is to keep his stuff that is, so your flushes are invulnerable. He has a lot of stuff that can never win against a flush. You want to kind of deny those, right? So remember that we beat 33 on the 7-6 deuce that we just saw, and on the flop, big blind had to fold absolutely every overcard known to man without a heart, which I think is insane and amazing, but that's how poker works, right? So pair no flush draw, he has to, bottom pair no flush draw, he has to fold or raise. Overs, he has to fold mostly. Straight draws like 10-9 on 7-6 deuce, he has to fold them. B125, we just start denying top pair no flush draw and over pairs. So this is your inherent advantage as UTG, for example, and as Brazer that didn't get 3-bet. The overpairs, that's the biggest advantage. You kind of want to keep those betting. You want to keep those in your range. B25 will deny overs no flush draw. So like, for example, on the 7-6 deuce, as we just saw, 10-9 offsuit, ace jack offsuit. And we'll like clean the range a little bit. And all these small bet sizes will kind of force your opponent to go polar. And then we'll clean the range. If he's raising flushes, if he's raising king of hearts, ace of hearts, queen of hearts type hands, then on the turn when you just get called, you can just absolutely go wombo combo, which means overbet on hearts. And also the hands have less visibility because lack of flush draws, they can't really call turns like almost ever. There are no turns that are super improving those hands. We're giving them a lot of extra equity versus your flushes, so he has to fold more. On average across a few boards I've looked into, B75, by the way, loses 2 BB per 100 compared to B25. So if you would like to if you think that some exploit will change that, that's also okay. B125 loses, so if you want to overbet on these boards on flops, you'll lose 7 BB per 100, so it's not really a sort of valuable exploit, but you can change sizes to B50, B40, B75. B125 gives your opponent very easy folds, by the way. So that's also one thing. It doesn't really deny equity. He can just like almost fold range until like really, really good hands. So like 8-7 offsuit, ace jack with the jack of hearts, he can easily fold. 10 of hearts, 9 of spades, which is combo draw with a flush and gut shot and overs. He can fold that, and tens, right? Tens, no heart, meaning like over pairs. He just folds them. You don't want that. Okay. The logical explanation of passivity is also that there are 2 layers to ranges on monotone boards. There's the nut range, the top, the invulnerable. And then there's everything else that is super thin value. That's what you're actually working on the flop and turn. You can shove river, as you just saw on that board where it ran a 7-6 deuce, 3 hearts, king 3, you can shove the river, no problem. 7.5x spot, because your opponent just has a bluff catching range that is strong enough to call. But on the flop, you're very concentrated at like thin value par, right? So how you should think about, and in general, in poker and different pots, how can I format my bet sizes on these 3 streets that I can deny the most equity, that I can get the most value, that I can punish my opponent to the max, right? And you can always overbet and jam later. That's also a real thing, okay? To cooler flush versus flush, it doesn't really make sense to do that on the flop. Versus passive rec is a print, yes. So you're cleaning up the range. You're making both ranges go absolutely polar. The folding hands have minimal equity against your value anyway, right? So this is a bit of a recap. TLDR, if you weren't paying attention earlier, big blind's trash is really trashy, and a lot, right? And it's worth denying. Flop flushes are almost invulnerable. You're not discussing with those. This is a later proposition, flush versus flush. You're kind of this is the fast play early, right? Large sizes fold his dead to flush hands, right? He's very, very vulnerable hands. Pair no flush draw, lower flush draw, even pair plus flush draw in some cases. And you still want to value bet over pairs because that's your advantage as the BFR. In position, we'll mostly use B50 and B75 on the turn as the size, but on 4-card flush turns, this is an SRP, by the way, on 4 and 3-bet pot. On 4-card flush turns, the overbet is really preferred. And the heuristic here is also the better the turn for you, the lower the size in equity. Flush turns polarize you a lot because you get advantage in nuts, but you don't really have an advantage in equity. So you're taking that small fraction plus the bluffs and just really throwing in a lot of chips for them because you're good. You're above your opponent's range. The other ones also kind of force your opponent not to call as often. You're using a smaller size, the ones that give you way more equity. On the flop, a large portion of big blind's check raising range will contain as a semi-bluff the ace of hearts X, if it's not an ace high board, obviously, and king of hearts X blocker hands. So in a scenario where you bet ace high and king high flushes, but also ace high and king high bluffs, and don't get raised, right? Because those are in his raising range a lot, not full frequency, but for a lot of people, there will be very high frequency. Big blind will mostly have a range of bluff catchers, and you dominate his range severely. It's time to deny everything with your huge nut advantage and play no bluffs, right? So as a piece of advice for further study, get comfy with bets. Look at what bets do, look at equities, look at turn reports, and see what each bet size accomplishes in each spot. This is where you can also exploit your opponents by realizing that they will overfold a class of hands to B25, for example, right? Or in some spots, overcall. So try to think how you would think before, right? So for example, this is spot hijack 2 blinds, cut off 3 bets, hijack calls, right? Hijack checks, cut off B20 on the flop. The board is 7-6 deuce. It's really, really hard to defend this board because you think about SRP, right? So ETG versus big blind. And then you think about the spot, this spot, because it's a 3-bet pot and you got 3-bet and you're out of position, you think you should be tighter. But versus B20, you actually have to defend king highs, which is not like B20 actually really overperforms in this spot. Like you see that you have to defend king jack of spades and it's disgusting. A lot of non-hard broadways at frequency, high stakes humans don't really do that unless they're really, really good, which is rare, right? So yeah, how to try to garner exploits, use the node locking, but also remember how you thought about these spots before studying them, right? And look at mostly just gross spots. Look at spots that make you want to puke and realize, like that river spot where it's 7.5x pot shove, and he has to call all the flushes. Not really very easy. So that's how your opponents think about them mostly, because they won't really be studied. Even if like you guys did the poll at the beginning with the hours put into monotone, if you guys, so honestly, you guys are like being here, doing GTO Wizard, you know, you're way ahead of like your competition. It's all good. So that's how your opponents think. Your opponents think about monotone boards mostly like how you thought about them before studying. And now that you know how positions play, because you'll put in all the work, you'll also know how to exploit them. Now understand the sim and know what they don't know, and you'll have edge. Thank you so much. If you have a question, I'm always in Discord. You can just drop me apps there at Scrimitsu, and I'll be in Discord. Thank you so much for being here. Really, really appreciate you guys. You can always type in, I browse the cash game section in Discord. I browse the weekly coaching section in Discord, and also browse the premium wink wink section in Discord. It's wherever you want. Wherever you want, I'll be there. And I try to answer questions about stats, about like you can ask whatever, not necessarily on the coaching. Thank you so much. You guys are freaking amazing. Thank you for attending, and really appreciate you guys, being here. And I'll see you guys in the next one. That will be hopefully and probably next month.